Here. Commissioner Johnston present. Trumbull present. Just say you're here.
Oh, okay, Schwartz present.
Good, present.
Commissioner Purcell, present.
Yeah. Present. Okay, are there any members of the public who have any comments on items not on the agenda?
Eric, yes. You want to get introduced?
Deputy City Clerk. I am here to talk to you about board and commission recruitment. The city is currently looking to fill 3 positions on the Historic Resources Board, 5 on the Parks and Recreation Commission, and 1 on the Planning and Transportation Commission. Applications are going to be due January 27th at 4:30 p.m. And the reason the clerk's office comes to your commissions is for 2 reasons. 1, members of the public are here who may be interested in these various commissions, but also you are a great resource for us to reach out to the community. So we'll leave a flyer with each of you and encourage each of you to reach out to 1 or 2 residents who you think might be interested in 1 or 2 of these commissions. Again, Historic Resources Board, Parks and Recreation Commission, Planning and Transportation Commission. Applications will be due January 27th. Questions can be directed to the City Clerk's Office, 650-329-2571. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other? Okay, let's talk about the meeting minutes from last meeting. Does anyone have any comments, changes?
I have, what I just noticed was on page 3. It said the joint study session between the council and the UAC is being rescheduled for early 2016. So I'm assuming they mean 2017.
Good catch.
And further down on the page, applications for this year totally about 1.5 megawatts, and I assume you mean totaling. And
I'm sorry, could you repeat that second?
on
About 10 lines down under new business.
it says the program has received applications for this year totally about 1.5 megawatts, and so it sounds very Valley Girl.
It's
but I
Southern
think,
California
right? But I think
lingo.
you meant totaling.
Thank you.
And I think on page 5 it was Chair Cook agreed, and it says with the and I said I think you mean that instead of with the. So those are minor. Oh, and then further down, anyway, I just found typos, but in any case,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Thank you. Anything else?
Move approval of those changes.
Okay, we have a motion. Second? We have a motion and a second to adopt the minutes as amended, changed. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? None. Carries unanimously. Agenda review and revisions. The amendment to the item number 3, amendment to utilities rule and regulation 27. I'd like to postpone that to our next meeting, which is just a few weeks away. I think Commissioner Ballantyne would have some excellent input on this item, and so we'll be delaying that to the next meeting. Reports from commissioner meetings and events. Anyone have any?
Well, it's nice to be here. I haven't been here in a while, so I missed one of the last meetings because I was giving the keynote address at the Western Energy Institute Women in Energy Symposium. And what was really fascinating about this conference that was different than any conference I've been to, other than the fact that it was almost all women, which is very unusual in the utility industry, was that the women represented like every functional group in the utility. I had never been to a conference that had that many people from just an entire cross-section, and they put on a very good event. I stayed for the whole thing, and they just did a great job, and I would encourage the women of our utility to participate in that in the future. I thought it was one of the most well-done conferences that I had been to in a long time, and I thought they just had a lot of things that I think were very insightful about the process of how utilities work together, as well as the substance of what people were doing. And the speakers they had, in addition to me, I thought were really good and did a really nice job. And then the other event that I went to was the Low Income Energy Issues Forum that was put on by DEFG, and that was what I thought was, so I was presenting there a new model that I'm working on low income that has to do with solvency. And I don't know how relevant it is for us in terms of our low income, but there may be actually people in the community who are having trouble paying their bills, and sometimes, so if that is something that is an issue, there were a lot of things that we discussed at that event that I think would be very useful in terms of what are some of the creative ways that we might be supportive of people in our community who are having difficulty but really would like to pay their bills, and there may be the way you design programs that if you frame it a little differently, lets you see that the way you design a program works better for some segments of people who are low income than others, and I think that's what we were trying to get at with the workshop. And so it was just, it was again, people were represented from all over the country, and there's a lot of creative work being out there that deal with how people can be sustainable. Ed, do you have a sense of, do we have a significant segment of people who have trouble paying their bills?
We certainly have a segment. I'm not sure how significant it would be described. Certainly happy to pull together some information on that.
Yeah, because I think that there are just some really good programs out there that are that could be quite useful.
Great, thanks. Any other reports? Very well. We welcome the Director of Utilities report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. First off, I would like to introduce a couple of our new appointments, new positions, perhaps not new employees, but nonetheless taking on new roles. First, Dean Batchelor is our new Chief Operating Officer, and this is a new position recently established within our department. And Jonathan Abenshine is our new Assistant Director for Resource Management. I'm very pleased, personally pleased, that both of them have decided to step up and will be presenting as the occasion arises to the Utility Advisory Commission, and obviously very involved in our overall operations as a department. So let me hit a few of our recent events and updates for the department. First, in terms of our large-scale solar projects, you may have seen a press release on this, that in December, the city added 2 new large-scale solar projects to our renewable energy portfolio, increasing our solar commitments in California to more than 150 megawatts. Of those total solar commitments, over 125 are now operating. The 40 megawatt Elevation Solar C and 20 megawatt Western Antelope Blue Sky Ranch B solar farms located in Lancaster, California, a little north of the valley, are developed, owned, and operated by S-Power, a leading independent renewable energy provider. Palo Alto is purchasing all 60 megawatts of solar energy produced at these facilities under 25-year power purchase agreements. These projects represent the last of 5 recent solar PPA contracts that will enable the city to supply about 1/3 of Palo Alto's annual electricity needs through solar energy. The city is now on track to reach our renewable portfolio standard of up to 60% in 2017, helping us move closer to our goal of 100% carbon-free electricity. Next note is on recent water supply changes, which I suspect you've heard about, as we have. The San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, SFPUC, began infrastructure improvement work on the Mountain Tunnel pipeline facility that delivers water to its wholesale customers from the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir. In order to accommodate this work, water supply from Hetch Hetchy is anticipated to be shut down until March of this year. During this period, SFPUC will provide San Francisco Regional Water System customers, including Palo Alto, with treated water from the Sonoma Valley and Harry Tracy water treatment plants. City staff will work with SFPUC to deliver timely information about water source changes through our webpage, cityofpaloalto.org/water quality, and proactive communication with customers via neighborhoods, email listserv, social media, etc., as appropriate. This is a more recent change that added to prior blend changes in the late November, early December time period. Next, in terms of water supply and impact of our recent storms. Recent storms have made a significant contribution to that water supply availability through this regional system. As of January 5th, the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir is 93.9% full. Other storage is similarly situated. State Water Resources Control Board is holding a workshop next week to discuss the fate of the emergency conservation regulation beyond February 2017. As you may be aware, it was the increase in storage and management of storage in many of its reservoirs that led SFPUC to do blend change back in November, December. Next, other Bay Area storm response items of note. Recent winter storms have energized Bay Area agencies, including the city's utilities, Office of Emergency Services, Public Works, and other departments, and regional entities to coordinate efforts for storm, flooding, and emergency response. City of Palo Alto has not yet experienced a major local creek flooding at this point, and we're thankful for that. We've had a few power outages this past weekend due to rains, windy conditions, and trees falling on power lines. Less than 1,000 out of our total 66,000 residential customers experienced a power outage of some duration over the past weekend and early part of this week. This impact was relatively small compared with the rest of the Bay Area, and we're grateful to our staff who worked diligently to swiftly ensure responsiveness and continuity of services to customers, even during the weekend hours and through inclement weather.
So one of my good friends was in the territory, that service territory that was affected, and she was, first of all, very impressed with the outage map. She liked that she felt she had an outage map that she could look at and that updated when things were going to be changed and fixed, and how you even beat the time you thought it was going to be. And she ended up posting on Nextdoor. And anyway, so she just expressed a lot of positive things to me about the experience in dealing with it, and so I thought that was good to know.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I appreciate that on behalf of staff. And finally, just in terms of upcoming events, a few save the dates. The city is hosting our Earth Day Festival on Saturday, April 22nd. This event invites all in the area to join in festivities, including cities, nonprofits, environmental, and community groups. Activities will include the Great Race for Saving Water, our 5K fun run and walk, electric vehicle test drives, nature walks, bike tours, zoo animals, zero waste picnic raffles, live music, arts and crafts, entertainment, and more. I'm not sure what the more could be beyond that, but nonetheless, there will be more.
What day is that?
It's Saturday, April 22nd. And that concludes my report.
Thank you so much for your report. Are there any commissioner comments? So just,
I had a chance to talk to Ed earlier in the week about the planning for a strategic plan. I don't want to talk about that now, but we didn't have a meeting last month. We have a very short agenda this month, and I think we're missing opportunities. I don't think we we don't want to make staff work, but you've got a group here that's, James is well-informed, the rest of us are less and less and less informed about things. It's a process of educating us and community members as we go along. I think we should take opportunities at these meetings when we don't have a full agenda to learn a little bit more about whether it's the budget or operations, or meet somebody else from staff or whatever. Something that doesn't take you a lot of work because you guys know it, and, you know, most of it. That's all I had.
Great, thanks. And on behalf of the board, I have two things. One, I would like to welcome our new city council liaison, City Council Member Eric Filseth, and we look forward to having you here and your input. Thank you so much. And secondly, I'd like to congratulate Dean and Jonathan. The city, our ratepayers and our residents are really fortunate to have your leadership. So thank you very much for taking this on. As
Unrelated, I do have another comment that Commissioner Ballantyne asked me to pass along to the commission. So if this is the right time, I'll go ahead and read it. He forwarded it to myself and to Jessica Mullen in interest of not creating a Brown Act issue. So I passed it along, and I promised I would forward it to the commission. He asked us to convey that following up on our prior discussion to leverage heat pump water heating, he's been doing some follow-up research, and his message is that my starting point for this was an assumption that the coefficient of performance for the state-of-the-art heat pumps was rather low, and that it would require nearly as much electrical energy to pump the heat as it would to generate the heat. And on that basis, I did not understand the benefit of using solar energy for heat pump water heating, because in many cases the energy, if not carefully stored as hot water, might need to come from the grid at night. After studying more deeply, I'm finding lots of references to heating water via heat pump from 10 degrees centigrade to 60 C with a coefficient of performance of 4 instead of 1. This creates the positive impact of making 4 kilowatt of heat available for use at 60 C for every 1 kilowatt of electrical energy input. And since the ambient conditions in Palo Alto are very often suitable in the range of 10 C or hotter, this seems extremely viable. What's more, I have found multiple references to heat pumps in the range of 2,000 to 3,000 for a residential scale unit. That strikes me as very likely much lower in cost than the installed system with equivalent solar thermal capability. With this better understanding, I'm now completely in support of the program. Best regards, Arnie. And I would note that we will have a future item that will have a greater opportunity for discussion.
Great, thank you very much. As we have no unfinished business, I'd like to go straight to new business, item number 1.
Very good. We have staff prepared to report on our legislative policy guidelines. Take your pick. You know if our screens are on? We're ready to go. Very good.
Yeah, good evening. I'm Heather Dollar, Senior Resource Planner, with Utilities Department.
Debbie Lloyd, I am the Utilities Compliance Manager, currently also Interim Assistant Director in Engineering. For new commissioners, we come once a year with changes, recommendations to the legislative guidelines. Heather's going to walk through this presentation, but just to give you a quick overview of the structure of the guidelines, we split it into kind of overarching issues that affect all the utilities. We have our all utilities section, and then we go through electric, natural gas, fiber, wastewater, and water. So on the very specific issues. Utilities is very highly regulated. It is very often the focus of new legislative proposals. So we try and set these guidelines up so that we as staff, when we're looking at proposals, and also when elected officials or commissioners go and meet with the legislature, then we have these guidelines to follow, and we don't have to keep coming back every single time something new comes up. We've been developing these over the years, and so what you see in your packet is that we have the new guidelines that we're proposing, but we also show you in one of the attachments the red lines, so you can see the changes that have been made from previous years.
So just to start, this also applies to regulations?
Yeah, some of the language in here would guide us as well in dealing with regulatory bodies with proposals that come up.
Thanks. So with that, we'll go right into it. You'll see on the next slide just the brief agenda outline. We'll chop this into mainly two portions, the last portion being your motion, but we'll go ahead and speak about the recommended amended guidelines and then give a little bit of a preview of what we think is coming down the pipe for 2017. On the next slide, Debbie did a great job of touching on why we're doing this. Just also wanted to mention that we certainly take into consideration and work with the city in developing their own legislative guidelines as we develop ours. And these policies that you may be approving today won't sunset, but they continue on until the next year, which gives staff some continuity. So the next slide just speaks about, these are the overarching goals that we have, all utilities. Won't read them to you, and indeed, as I speak, I'm not going to read anything to you. So I may be pausing to allow you to read. Wanted to point out here that these have not changed from last year. So if you recall the goals from last year, there's no change that we're recommending in the overarching goals. Going into the specifics, and I'll be referencing Exhibit 1, which is the clean version Debbie mentioned, as well as perhaps if you'd like to look at the red lines, that's Attachment B in your packet. So I think we can go to the first recommendation, all utilities. First, staff recommends adding on page 3 this language here that I'll pause so you can read. We suggest adding this because last year there was a bill that lent itself to staff engaging key account representatives to speak with our larger customers, our commercial customers, about a potential bill. But before we could debate the merits of taking that action, we realized that we actually didn't have any authorization in these guidelines to even do that. So would such a bill come up again, we would asking here for your approval to first debate whether or not we would want to engage our key account reps and through them our commercial or larger customers, and then secondly to even have the authority to do that. Moving on, we suggest amending number 12. We suggest striking specific rate-making language and replacing it with broader language. We're doing that because we don't know of any rate-making reform efforts that are going to be coming up in 2017. Rate-making flexibility is captured in our overarching goals already in the document. And we also suggest here adding language which would provide us flexibility in just opposing generally unrealistic policies. And then lastly on this slide, we recommend striking language regarding the funding. It's mostly streamlining because funding for infrastructure security and customer confidentiality are found elsewhere in the document. And we add cap and trade language because we noticed that that language was in the document twice, and it doesn't need to be. We decided to just strike it there and add it to the overarching all utilities portion. Next slide. So moving specifically to the electric portion. One slide here on pages 4 and 5, we recommend striking the NEM local successor language, not because we don't anticipate an NEM bill is going to be forthcoming. Indeed, we do anticipate an NEM bill coming in 2017, but specifically what we had in this current language speaks to successor programs. And as you know, we already have a successor program. Staff will still continue to have the flexibility to work with the legislature on any NEM bill language as it comes out, but we just don't need that specific successor language in these guidelines anymore. And then we also just add some language regarding some of the items you see here because we understand that this is the issues that we're going to be facing in 2017. And then the deletion you see noted speaks to that cap and trade language that I mentioned. It was here in electric, and we just moved it up to the all utilities portion. For natural gas, we have one suggested amendment, and that is, again, to strike the cap and trade language, to move it up to all utilities, but to leave in the language regarding opposing legislation about unreasonable customer costs. That's just an overarching citywide policy as a utility-specific one. On to wastewater. We just have one slide, one suggestion here. We suggest adding this language, and I'll pause again so you can read that. We suggest adding it simply because it wasn't there before, and we just think it makes sense.
Why wouldn't this be a general one? For all utilities?
We certainly could move it there, if you like. If we could broaden, here we were specifically speaking about wastewater infrastructure, but we could certainly broaden it to mean infrastructure for the entire utility suite.
I mean, it just seems like there are other utilities where the security issue would be greater than wastewater.
Sure. Moving on to the water section. You'll see this language here that we recommend deleting, and I'll tell you the initials, in case you don't know what CUWCC stands for, is the California Urban Water Conservation Council. We noticed that participation with this particular council, as well as any stakeholders, doesn't really require guidance set in a legislative document such as this, so it didn't seem like it was needed here. Additionally, we haven't been using the best management practice revisions as we had anticipated, so it doesn't seem like an issue for 2017, so we recommend striking that. With regard to the amendment, we do add a bullet regarding assurances from SFPUC, and we do recommend striking some language, again, because that's not a current concern. More of an issue is just kind of overseeing and watching SFPUC to ensure that they're acting in the best interest not only of us but of all the other stakeholders. On the next slide, two amendments here. Recommend striking language that, again, is not a current concern, but adding language that is, which would favor Palo Alto due to the current water shortage allocation formula, and that language is the bullet regarding the contract that you see there. We also recommend amending number 11, which is striking language about the allocation of funds, again, the infrastructure, because funding for local programs, which this speaks to, is found elsewhere in the document, and so this was just redundant. And then we suggest adding language supporting reasonable groundwater management, again, because we just think that that makes sense. With regards to the recommendations on page 16, this is a lot of streamlining. The language was a little bit convoluted, we think, as we were looking for it before, so we just want to streamline the language. And also, some of the things that you'll see in there are just preparing for the Water Board's conservation implementation efforts. As you may know, there was an executive order issued a few months ago where the governor wants the Water Board to start implementing some long-term conservation efforts. And so this language, specifically you'll see under Amendment 13, will guide staff in doing that.
What was Proposition 218?
218 is much, and Jessica can weigh in if you want, it's much like Prop 26 that speaks to voter approval about utility rates.
And this is Jessica Mullen in the City Attorney's Office, and 218 is really focused on like the water and wastewater, and 26 is on the gas and electric, but Heather's absolutely right, they're very similar.
So any other questions? That ends that first part of our portion regarding the suggested amendments.
I have a question. Sure. So given what look like the change in policies that are going to be happening at the federal level, and that the state is likely to step up to the plate because California wants to maintain its interest in trying to take a more responsive approach to climate change, is there any language that we need to add that would set you up so that you can be responsive to that? Because there's likely to be some fallout or shifting as federal and state things sort of get out of sync.
I don't think that we can think of any specific language. A lot of what we have here is intentionally broad to give us that specificity to do exactly what you're talking about. So I think we're pretty confident that we don't need to seek that from you this time, Commissioner, yeah.
And again, the goal of this is a lot of the time when the legislature is going through its sausage making on new legislation, that we can jump in quickly and respond. Certainly if we see new things coming up, we can come back for direction, given more time. But as Heather said, and if you look at the goals as well, the goals are very broad. I mean, they're very much aligned with the city goals, where we want local accountability, we want environmental protection. So we have a lot of very broad-based goals and guidelines in here to guide us.
Is the order of the goals and the the policy guidelines, is the order of this significant? I mean, are these ranked in priority order? This is my first time through this, so
they're all very important to us, Commissioner. We don't favor any.
Yeah, we have to achieve all of them. No, we've tried not to rank in importance.
No, they're not ranked.
And definitely on the guidelines. I mean, if you went back and look at the history, a lot of the times we're just adding on the end as new things come out and things get strapped. So definitely no order in the guidelines and the goals. Yeah, we have what we attempted to do here, and sorry, I should have explained the structure a bit more as well, to try and keep us disciplined when we're looking at these guidelines. We have these overarching goals, and then when we identify guidelines, we say what goals are these guidelines going to support. So we try and stay to 3 and 4 key goals for each of the utilities, and then we have many guidelines, but we try and make sure that they're meeting at least one of the goals that have been identified.
If I could add, perhaps also in the interest of orientation for those who don't deal with these types of issues on an ongoing basis, for better or for worse, unfortunately, many of our elements become more defensive than perhaps proactive and comprehensive in their initial thought. So based upon the experience that we've seen on bills, quite often setting up guidelines such as these are helpful when there are effectively 11th hour, or as they call them, gut and amend bills that appear late in the session. So this gives us the ability to act quickly on those. I think to Commissioner Schwartz's comment, I suspect that the larger issue of the California versus federal initiatives will be things we'll see coming and will be very visible and very highly discussed, such that will, should that take the form of a bill and legislation at the state level, that will be able to come back as those take shape. And hopefully those will be more global rather than very surgical in their application.
And does this cover supporting energy efficiency measures?
Yes.
Yes.
So that's a good seg into the next portion, unless anyone has any other questions. So we'll speak a little bit about what we see as issues that are going to be coming up in 2017. And in preparing this, Debbie and I are certainly looking along with our colleagues, as what has happened from our perspective last year and a little bit as to what we think is going to happen in 2017. But we also have been working closely with NCPA and CMUA, our member agencies. And so we all collectively feel that these are issues that we're going to see in 2017. And again, I won't read them out to you. I had them here for you. But I would also add that energy storage is certainly going to be one that we think is going to be happening. As I alluded to earlier, we do anticipate that a net energy metering bill will be brought by the same sponsor as last year. And so we already started talking with stakeholders about what that might look like and how we might prepare. And we thought up until about 2 hours ago that regionalization, which, as you may know, is the effort to make a huge change in the energy market very succinctly, and I see a lot of nodding heads, so we won't get into it. We did hear that perhaps that may not be moving forward, but this is all rumors and not really sure what's going to be happening. Certainly don't want to tell anyone anything that I shouldn't, but we are still actively involved. We are still prepared to work on this as we move forward.
I'll just maybe step in on the regionalization. So this would be expanding what is right now a California market to other regions in the West. And this is possibly something where the new administration coming in is going to impact the appetite for other states to join the California market. So
Yeah, good point.
right now we are still engaged. Heather's going to be actually going to a meeting tomorrow, which is what do they call it, a joint legislative staff
Shareholder staff meeting in the governor's
stakeholder
office.
meeting in the governor's
Yeah.
office. To discuss this, we were actually asked specifically to participate because of our role. We are one of the members of the Bay Area Municipal Transmission Group. We're very active in transmission planning activities throughout the state. It used to be very concentrated on the Bay Area, but now we get involved because it impacts our ratepayers. And it came to the attention of some legislative staff, and they actually invited us to come along as a representative of this BAMEX group. So that's what we're looking at. If it does go ahead, we're going to stay very engaged in it.
On the next slide, we'll just address some Western issues. Western is always on our minds. We do believe that there's going to be hopefully some movement with regard to the Central Valley Project Improvement Act, which is the CVPIA. And I should note that...
Can I interrupt?
Please.
Could you say why we're interested in Western issues?
Sure. Western, Western meaning the Western Area Power Administration. They are in a contract with NCPA, which we are a member, to supply our hydro, which makes up a large part of our portfolio, to put it extremely succinctly. So the hydropower comes from the Central Valley Project Improvement, which was created a lot of reservoirs and dams and whatnot many years ago. There was a lot of environmental damage that occurred with that, and so Congress passed the Central Valley Project Improvement Act, which is an attempt to ameliorate that, and water and power customers are to pay into that, to the mitigation efforts, in a certain appropriate amount. And NCPA, and you'll see them mentioned there, with whom we partner with to get that hydropower, believes that power customers have perhaps been paying a little too much. So we are working closely with them, and you'll see some bullet points there that reflect that, specifically the third one about protecting our ratepayers from unwarranted costs. There are some other issues that we're also working on through NCPA with Western, and so this just gives you a kind of a flavor of what staff will be working on.
One of them, you'll see the 2025 Power Marketing Plan, which may seem to be a little far out into the future, but as a federal agency, this process has already been, going on for a year or two. So even though it's the new marketing plan, so that will kind of set the parameters for our contract. Even though that won't be coming in until 2025, we are very much engaged already in that development of the contract provisions.
So if this Western regional plan goes through and CalISO expands to be, that's going to change the carbon content of what we're getting from the power that we purchase there. Is that going to affect how many RECs we buy? Is that something we should be aware of and think about it in advance?
So the Western is used quite a lot in our dialogue here. So when we're talking about Western on this particular issue, we are talking about the Power Authority, from which we get a large portion of our hydroelectric power for our electric portfolio. previously when I said western states, I was talking about the kind of geographical area and other states that might participate in our California electricity market. So they are two separate issues. But in terms, going back to that regionalization, yes, that could change the carbon content of market power, the power that we buy on the region. We don't, I mean, I'm not going to say it's not going to change, but I don't think the thought is not that this marketing plan with the power agency is going to change the content of the power that we receive from them. It will still be a hydroelectric resource.
That said, if I could comment, really both of these issues, both through Western Area Power Administration as well as the regionalization, we do anticipate may see significant change as a result of the Trump administration. So this is definitely an area to watch.
That's a good segue into the next slide. Thank you, which are what we're going to see in 2017. And you'll note the picture there pretty much depicts what so many people are thinking about what's going to be happening in a few weeks. Mr. Trump has, as you can see, quite a few nominations to make. These, the ones that I noted here, are just the ones that are specific to our space. And I have heard that Scott Pruitt's hearing, he's potentially going to be the EPA administrator, is scheduled for a week from today. And we've also heard that Mr. Perry's hearing is hopefully going to be around that time. The hearings, they want them both to occur before the inauguration. So we'll see what happens if that goes on the track that they want it to. And again, as I believe Commissioner Schwartz alluded to, California is already gearing up to potentially fight some things that are coming down with the administration by hiring Attorney Holder. So that just gives you kind of a flavor of the stance that the state is already willing to take. Last year, water was a key issue with regard to some drought bills. Currently, drought is taking a bit of a back burner in the Congress, not just because of all the changes that are occurring, but because we've had a lot of precipitation, and they are just going to adopt really a wait-and-see approach to determine if a drought bill specific to California is even necessary. Last year as well, we did have a key energy bill that was favorable because of the hydro provision that we mentioned. Specifically, there was language in this very, very big omnibus bill that would have allowed us to kind of cut through some of the red tape in relicensing the hydro contracts. It would have helped NCPA streamline things. As Debbie alluded to, we're already looking at the 2025 market plan. That's something that NCPA has to do almost a decade in advance, and the bill, the energy bill, would have helped alleviate that. However, when it went to conference at the end of last year, the House ended up just walking away from that conference and the bill died. We have heard that the sponsor, Senator Murkowski, does believe this is an important issue and wants to bring it again. However, she's not sure what's going to happen, not only with the Trump administration, but with regard to the House in general, if they're going to want to move it forward. So that's something that we'll continue to work with our federal lobbyists on. That concludes our presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions. The last portion is just the motion if you're so inclined.
Great. And before we have Commissioner questions and comments, we welcome the public. We have one card for public speaker. Please come up to the microphone.
Well, I wasn't planning to speak, but I noticed in the presentation nothing was said about fiber. Sorry. I noticed in the presentation that nothing was said about fiber. So, and yet in the material you were to have read in advance, it does say something about fibers. So I was wondering, when you take an action, what will it mean? Will that be included or not? Also, a particular thing that was said in the staff report, there was a difference between the final draft and the red line version. They didn't match. They didn't say the same thing on the subject of dig once. So I was wondering what what the intention was. Why change the dig once thing at all? And then finally, after you vote tonight, does it not take effect at all until council votes to accept your recommendation?
Staff can speak to some of those. Staff isn't recommending any substantial amendments on the fiber portion. There are some red lines, as the public speaker noted, but they are not substantially changing the content or the intent. The same thing applies to dig once. You'll see the policy remains, just worded differently.
Okay, so I'll leave it open now for questions from commissioners.
I just wanted to answer Jeff's question as I understood it, which is, all we do is make recommendations to city council. The council has to do this, so nothing can change until they've done it.
Okay, I would like to address Jeff's question about the dig once, and so, sorry, you did mention it, Heather, but why are they different from each other, the two different definitions, or the two different wordings for it? Do you know that they are different?
If you give me a minute to actually
Yeah.
look at the wording,
Yeah.
I can perhaps answer that. I don't know off the top of my head.
Actually, it looks like our final did not pick up the change that was proposed. So somehow it got lost between the red line and the final.
You know, it might just suffice for us to have you either change it subsequently for the city council, but I would want to know if it was intentional that they were different, and if it was intentional, I'd like the city council to know about kind of why, but
Okay.
if it's a typo or whatever.
No, thank you. In looking at that now, Ed's correct, it didn't pick up the exact language. Let me show you. The intention is to continue to have dig once language in there, and I can get back to my colleague who referenced this, and certainly pick up on that before it goes to council.
Great. So, any other questions? I think it would be helpful, the resolution, the motion, the way it's written, says the UAC recommends that the City Council adopt a resolution approving the City of Palo Alto Utilities legislative policy guidelines. I guess they're changed, so we are just asking to accept the updated version, not the changes. We're saying, hey, here's the new policy. Okay, great. Thank you. So if anyone has a motion, we could listen to that.
I'll move that the commission recommend these amended legislative policy guidelines to the council, including a correction by staff before they see it on the dig once language.
Thanks. Do you have a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any comments, questions, alternative motions? Very well, so we will take a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Sorry I didn't say that before. We really appreciate it. And on to the next item, number 2.
Thank you, Commissioners. We have Carla Daly, our Senior Resource Planner, to report on the 2017 Water Integrated Resource Plan guidelines.
Good evening, Commissioners. As you recall, we spent a fair bit of time on this plan at your November meeting, and so this will be a very short presentation. A couple of changes since the draft you saw in November. We, per the Commission's request, expanded the discussion of the threats to SFPUC supply, specifically noting the state proposal to increase natural flow requirements on the Tuolumne, the pending lawsuit. Uh-oh.
Oh.
I'll be quick. I'm not running out of battery.
It'll be a very quick presentation.
The lawsuit asking SFPUC to study removal of the dam and the potential impact of climate change on Sierra snowpack. We also noted that with these very real threats, we anticipate that we and other agencies would have ample time to make changes if there are significant changes to SFPUC supplies. Thanks. After we presented the draft to you, we took the plan to the Utilities Risk Oversight Committee, and they suggested the change in the fourth bullet point. So these are the guidelines that you saw in November with the red line strikeout of the UROC suggested changes in the fourth bullet, just being a little bit more specific about investigating the technical feasibility and financial impact of some of these non-traditional, non-potable sources. So with those two exceptions, this is what you reviewed in November, and I don't have anything in addition to share with you this evening.
And what's the recommendation from staff?
Oh, sorry, the recommendation from staff, I should have included that slide, is to that the Utilities Advisory Commission recommend that Council approve the updated 2017 Water Integrated Resources Plan guidelines.
Thanks. We have no public comment cards, so Commissioners, any comments or questions?
This is just kind of a basic question. As a practical matter, how does this document get used on a day-to-day basis?
Certainly, I mean, we're already pursuing cost-effective water efficiency conservation. That's not going to change. I think, the last three bullets will really continue to guide our day-to-day work activities. We really, I think, need to have a better understanding of customers' preference for Hetch Hetchy water quality.
You got a little feedback recently.
Definitely did. Although, what happened in that case is somewhat different from the quality impacts that one would observe by blending groundwater that doesn't have algae blooms in it, which is really what happened a few weeks ago. So, but yes, you're right. I mean, customers notice when the water changes. They definitely notice. So we would, it would not be something that I think we would want to try and sneak past them. We would want to have real buy-in from the customers who would be impacted by that sort of change, and have a feel for how our customers value that water from a checkbook standpoint. If it means saving a few pennies a month, is that something they would be interested in? So one of the things I want to do in the near term is figure out how to get that information and probably find a consultant that really knows how to do that type of survey in a very scientifically sound way. We don't want to just we don't want to do that willy-nilly. We would want some real data on that. And then the recycled water strategic plan, I mean, we are going down that path. We are going to proceed with that, but I think it's just important to realize how how recycled water and potable water really do relate to one another, and have that very clear in this plan, that those two things are very closely tied together.
That was really where I was going to go to, which is, I mean, there's a lot of discussion here about the recycled water strategic plan and how that could affect all of this. And when do we expect that?
So we just recently received the funding from the Santa Clara Valley Water District to proceed, and have gotten the contractor on board to start working on that project, but really it'll be a couple of years before we have particularly the groundwater piece of that. That'll be coming up with sort of a new cost estimate of expanding the current recycled water system. That's some work, but that's a quicker part of the project to do, gathering the data on our groundwater and trying to determine really what's going on with the aquifer in this part of the county will be a little more time intensive.
And then is it anticipated that once that strategic plan is done, you go back and look at at this one?
Absolutely.
So how does the maintenance that's going to happen with the Hetch Hetchy tunnels affect, because that's going to affect the taste of the water near term? I think that what happens is the water tastes differently, and now it becomes a pressing issue, and they need something to be told that's other than, oh, this is part of our strategic plan that we're doing that's going to be ready in a couple of years. I think that isn't a reasonable response when people are out there agitating about it. And so there's the tunnel change that's going to affect it. There's, I think you know what, I realized I know your first name. Right, Johnston. I was like, no, I knew the AC part. I was like, Commissioner Johnston. That people are aware of it now. And then the other issue that I think is really important is the basement dewatering issue. That again, that's something that is very top of mind, that people get very agitated about. And if there's something reasonable that we're doing to sort of, that they don't have to worry, we just have to have that in a very front and center kind of way, so that when you start seeing people getting agitated about it, that you can come down. Or to have a sign that goes on somebody's front lawn that says, here's where the information is, and here's what it is, and here's what's being done. And it may make sense to have something where there's a tanker truck that takes the water or something, that gets people, because the people have the sense that they're being asked to conserve and to be really frugal, and then they see the stuff that looks like waste. So I think that's something that is, you have to use kind of a common sense response, and I think it needs to be something that's more immediate. So that's my opinion about that. Then the other one that I just wanted to comment about on page 33, I was pleased to see that on the demand side management, you're referencing the idea of metering, and though the idea that it's not going to happen until 2022 seems like a long time, but hopefully, as one of the other things that we can talk about when we're talking about other things we can talk about in terms of education, is what really is our smart grid plan and how are we doing it? Because I do think that one of the things that Palo Alto is in a very exceptional position to do is to do this kind of advanced metering for all of our resource streams in a way that's coordinated. I think that's one of the contributions that we can make to the industry that could be very profound, because we're in an unusual position to be able to manage it as a holistic project. It's not something that has to be done piecemeal the way it is in a lot of communities. So I'd say that's one of the places we are really well positioned to be able to take a leadership role that can be a model for other communities. So anyway, I just hope that that's part of something we can talk about.
Yeah, my recollections, we talked about this last year, was, sorry, some of us had the feeling that the plan wasn't dire enough, or the outlook wasn't dire enough, that it could get a lot worse than what it was looking like in the report that was presented. As we've thought about this, is there anything in this that reflects the thought that the future might be much more challenging than most people anticipate, or is that not really captured in the report? You don't get the amplitude of the urgency and the like.
Well, I mean, we do have discussions in the report about some more
Climate change
bleak
things,
potential futures. Even with the the one that's kind of facing us the most immediately, which is the state's proposal to increase unimpaired flow on the Tuolumne. Even with that change, which is not an insignificant change, the average precipitation year, we still have plenty of water to serve all of the current customers that PUC has. So when we really start getting into problems is in the dry year situations, and we have a dry year need now, and under some of these other more dire scenarios, we have a bigger dry year need. And so, the challenge with that is looking at these other, there's two things. One is reducing the need for potable water through recycled water, which the recycled water plan will hopefully inform much more than we have right now. And then also whether any of these other potable water supply sources do any better job of meeting dry year needs or not. And really none of them are bulletproof in a dry year. Certainly, as we saw in 2015, even if we would have been taking water from our own groundwater, we would have been required by the state to decrease our potable water use by 24%, no matter where that water was coming from. So there's no silver bullet potable water supply that is going to solve the dry year need issue. Again, with groundwater, if we had an indirect potable reuse system, and if the state recognized that as a drought-proof supply, sometime in the future that might be a more drought-proof supply. But right now, really we're going to be looking at mainly ways to reduce our potable water demand through these non-traditional sources and or recycled water. I don't know if I answered your question. I kind of talked around it a bit.
No, well, that was... I appreciate the comments. Ed, were you going to say something?
Sure. The one other dimension I would add, and it really doesn't speak to your point on a dire message, is what's shown here in red. And in effect, it is the reference to the technical feasibility and financial impact of non-traditional, AKA recycled water sources. So ultimately, the cost associated both with the expansion and advancement of the treatment of recycled water, as well as simply the rehabilitation of our existing infrastructure, we see as an issue that we really will be getting more information on over the course of the upcoming work, as well as the work that Public Works is leading for the regional wastewater treatment facility. So at this point in time, it's simply a pointer. As work, again, as Carla pointed out, that came out of the discussion of our staff risk oversight committee, and that recognized that this is something that we'll get a better handle on over the next couple of years. So we simply want to flag it at this point. But it certainly is a significant issue that we, at a minimum, a significant financial issue as we get our arms around.
If I could just add one more comment, we recognize that there's a lot of big tasks that are kind of hanging out there that would be nice to have done right now when we're looking at this, but we just felt like it was really important to step back again. We haven't looked at this plan for a number of years. We just went through and maybe are done with a significant drought period. I hesitate to say that quite yet, but boy, we sure have a lot of water and snow right now. And so we wanted to look again at okay, what are those potable water alternatives again? And what's happened with the cost of those resources? How has that changed? How have the projections of those resource costs changed since we've looked at this last? And given what we learned about what happened in the 2015 state mandated reductions, how would that have played out if we had some of these other potable resources in our portfolio? So I think that for me, this report gives a nice document that when we have these other pieces of information, we're not starting from zero. We can pull this out again and do a very quick update of it and pull all this other information in and have something more significant than we have today. But this is what we have today.
So the report says, based on 2040 regional demand assumptions and using 94 years of historical data, drought years, supply shortages of 10 to 20% on the water system are estimated to occur at up to 8 times during the 91 years. And that the SFPUC uses for water supply planning purposes. So now this is not about you, this is about the SFPUC. I think it's nutty to be using 91 years of historical data to anticipate what our water supply is going to be over the following 50 or 60 years on that. It's just, it ignores the reality of what's happening. And I almost think like 40 years from now, if our water supply on average is half of what it is now, or whatever, some particular assumption on a regular basis, what do we wish we were doing now? That's sort of how I'd be thinking about the question. Whether 40 years is the right period, 30 or 20 or whatever, but are we thinking ahead and pessimistically enough about that?
And the SFPUC is undertaking more rigorous climate change studies as we speak. So yeah, everybody's thinking of that, but there isn't a scenario out there for us all to rally around yet. They're looking at it.
I think there can be a scenario. There has to be maybe assumptions at different levels, maybe some probabilities of those, but there's some probability of a really deep average reduction in this, and 20, 30, 40 years in the future, what should we be thinking about now? That's what worries me about the whole thing. And
When I was working on the Smart Cities Conference, when it came to water, we actually had trouble finding a lot of good examples in the U.S. doing really sophisticated stuff, and we had to go to Australia and Israel were the places where the leading edge stuff was really happening. And it might be that this is a case that, this is a place where our community has an appetite for being on the cutting edge of this, but the people who are a little ahead of us might actually be in other countries who would love to work with us. So I'm just wondering, is that something that's on your radar, or can I have somebody that I could introduce you to that might be able to be useful for that?
It's definitely on our radar, and we definitely, a lot of water issues are regional. Not to say that there's nothing Palo Alto can do on this issue, but even recycled water, we're talking to certainly the Santa Clara Valley Water District, other agencies in the county, San Mateo County, it just may very well end up making sense to do these projects on a more regional level than on a purely local level. It might make sense to move our wastewater farther south where it's more needed and where there are recharge facilities and where there's already a giant purification plant, or maybe it makes more sense to build one in Sunnyvale. Who knows what makes sense with this, but yeah, there's folks from Australia, folks from Israel, folks who are consultants here who travel to those places and bring back information. There's a lot of information sharing going on, and it's just going to be a matter of figuring out how to most efficiently deploy all of our resources to make water more available to everyone in the Bay Area.
I think it's also worth noting, I mean, when you talk about the fact that these projections of 20% drops based on historical data are not particularly dire, that's true. But I think it's also worth noting that even now we have pretty effective defense, ability to respond to those level of shortages or even deeper levels of shortages. Palo Altans have shown an ability to cut back very deeply. We have other options on the table with groundwater if we had to use them. And we're also taking steps right now. We've achieved quite a bit on our 20 by 2020 goals to reduce water consumption per customer. And we've actually made great strides on that. So we're headed in the right direction. Some of the things that we're talking about in the Water Integrated Resource Plan related to recycled water are exactly the kind of things that we want to be looking at in a more dire scenario. So while the projections might not encompass the dire scenario you're discussing, everything in this plan takes us in the right direction to be able to respond to even those sorts of dire scenarios.
City's done tremendous amount, and there's good work in this. So I'm proud of the city and how it's responded and all that. I don't know if I have a specific recommendation, but it's almost like, gee, in the next couple of years, it'd be nice if we had more thought given to what happens if it's not this much of a decrease, it's this much, and long term, emergency becomes a regular basis. What just the beginnings of looking at that, perhaps, maybe the beginnings is the wrong word, but some study giving consideration to longer term worse outcomes. Yeah, so that was all I had to.
Sorry, yeah, can I ask a question? And if you guys are, if you guys already covered this at the previous session, then tell me and I'll shut up, right? The discussion we're having is, if I understand, is basically, in a normal year, we don't have any problems with SFPUC. And in a dry year, we might have some problems, and we might not be able to cover it through conservation. But do we have any sort of estimation of if we have a problem in the dry year, how big a problem we're likely to have? Because, if we're looking and we're going to say, okay, we're going to send this much in recycled water, and maybe it'll cost us $40 million to build a pipe from here to here and so forth. It seems to me like, we sort of have to have a picture of how all it fits together and does it really solve the problem and so forth. So have you guys done any modeling of that?
So let me take a little bit of a shot at it. Right now, SFPUC it designs their system for no more than a 20% cutback. And so, but looking forward, whether it's due to climate change, whether it's due to unimpaired flow requirements by the state, what have you, yes, those could be potentially deeper than 20%. I'm not sure there's a quantifiable, if we have to cut back by this amount, that means we should spend X on a recycled water pipeline expansion. I'm not sure you can get to that equation exactly, but we certainly know that through multiple pressures, including the SCAP, that there's an overriding desire to reduce the reliance on imported water. And so that kind of overarching sentiment is guiding some of this to look at, is there a way that recycled water makes economic sense? What are all the different ways we could use recycled water, and which one ends up penciling out the best and benefits the largest number of people? So yeah, I don't know that we'll get to a recycled water is worth X dollars per acre foot because we anticipate this cutback coming 30 years from now. It'll be squishier than that. Does that answer your question at all?
I guess it just seems like, as we sort of go through this over the next few years, sort of trying to figure out cost benefits is, because this is expensive stuff, and we're going to have to trade this off against other things and so forth, and we're going to sort of figure out, okay, are we covered or are we not covered? Because, the converse is you wouldn't want to do a situation where you said, okay, we're doing this and we think we're covered, and actually it turns out we're not covered, because, I don't know, there's like 30% more people living in town or something like that and so forth. So it seems like that's a thought process that ought to be part of the analysis.
Well, I think going forward, to Carla's point, we may want to engage the water district in determining whether that's something that the city of Palo Alto, to what extent we would take that on an analysis at the local level versus one that we'll advocate that they take on. I think in some ways, as Carla pointed out, the regional perspective is probably a better level at which to evaluate it, and also certainly one at which it may be there is a cost economy of scale in that analysis. So we'll take that back for staff to discuss.
I think in general, this is one of the places where it would be really nice for us to have with the city council a conversation about priorities, and of the 20 things that could possibly be done by the utility, if we really started to look at them in comparison to each other, which 2 or 3 really would give us a big bang for it, and which might be something that would be important in the long-term looking, but it's not as immediate. And I think we don't, at this point, have a context for doing that, but I think it would be really useful. It was one of the things that came up at my interview this year, that it seemed like there was some interest in the council members who were interviewing me, that they would want to see that, because they asked me specifically that question. And so I think that's something that, if there's a way that we can have that kind of conversation, I think it would be a really worthwhile exercise.
Please, Lisa.
I have a question about, I guess it would be the demand side, both for the city of Palo Alto and regionally. We've proved that we can cut back demand given a fixed population. I know that city council is considering some fairly dramatic plans for increasing the number of housing units in the city, and I'm wondering if those scenarios are baked into the projections of what if there's a substantial population increase, or on the commercial side, commercial water use as well.
We did use the population and job estimates from the planning group that they're using in the comprehensive plan. We coordinated with that.
Do you remember what those were?
I don't off the top of my head. I don't. But the urban water management plan has all that information in it, and I can look that up for you. But that's where that came from. Just sort of anecdotally, what we have seen in Palo Alto is that even when population goes up, water use goes down. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is just the awareness of water conservation and advances in appliances and technologies. Another is that oftentimes when population goes up, the housing changes from single family to multifamily. Multifamily does not have yards, and so that's a huge water saving. So you can actually have more people living in a multifamily unit using less water than a family living in a single family home. The idea that when population goes up, water use goes up hasn't borne out in Palo Alto, or in many other communities on the peninsula. We're not unique in that fact.
So my concerns about thinking far enough ahead and being dire enough in our worries don't matter if you don't have a long lead time on taking corrective action. They only matter if they're corrective actions that you do now that have an impact 20, 30 years that be harder to do over a short term. Maybe that gets to something housing design, and do you build in recycling into the houses or other things? I don't know. I'm not an expert in the area, but I suppose as I think through my concerns, that's the direction it goes. Is what are very, very long lead time measures that would be considered if you were planning for a much drier future.
And we do have dual plumbing requirements for developments over a certain size, not in single-family homes right now, but there are constantly changes and relooks happening at building requirements. And as you know, there's new landscape requirements in effect as of January 1st. All landscape projects over a certain size have to have a permit and adhere to stricter landscape standards than we had in the past. That's a state law.
I don't know enough about water rights, if there's any way to, do you think long-term about acquiring water rights for the city that can be traded elsewhere and affect our supply at some point? I don't know, but very, very long lead time things is really where my questions I had, and I guess.
Any other comments? So this is an action item. Do we have a motion?
What action do we have to take?
I have another question. Discussion. How does the strategic plan relate to any of this as you work on that?
Well, conceptually, at least from my perspective, and I think this is certainly open for discussion, the combination of the water, or perhaps the juxtaposition of the water integrated resource plan, is somewhat between the shorter term look of a strategic plan and the longer term look of the comprehensive plan. And that, so if, as an example, the many of the issues that we just referenced on the level of projections, what happens in terms of population and employment within the city, we're working within basically an assumption with respect to what that future looks like. Should that assumption be, whether it's off or want to be changed by policy, I think would be the domain of the comprehensive plan that would then allow us probably to then go through another iteration here. For our strategic plan, we're really looking, at least at this point, at a more 5 to 10 year time frame in which the actions and in fact the priorities, as has been discussed for the department, would be driven by the outcome and the expectations of where we should be focusing our energy. And that's the staff energy in this case.
So this was last looked at last approved in 23, 14 years ago, is that right? So if this plan we're going to be in place till 2030.
Well, no, we'll come back and redo this plan when the recycled water strategic plan is finished.
And when will that be?
A couple of years.
Perhaps by that time certainly have a new comprehensive plan as well.
Exactly. I'm going to be daring here. I move that we recommend the updated guidelines to the council.
Any comments? All in favor? Aye.
I'll vote aye. I would almost call this the short-term or the mid-term water integrated resource plan guidelines. Yeah.
Sorry. The only other item on our agenda is the selection of potential topics for discussion at a future UAC meeting.
And if I might provide a bit of an overview and actually perhaps a little more elaborate discussion of this item than we typically have. There are a few items as we look at February and March and perhaps beyond that I want to bring to the Commission's attention. First, and apologize, I know this is always a little bit of an eye chart as the font's pretty small and we try to cover a lot of ground. So let me be a little more expansive here. First item in February of 2017, and note that your meeting is scheduled for February 1st, so it's actually just a couple of weeks out, or 3 weeks out. The pledged revenue resolution for repayment of state revolving fund loans. This is an item related to the renovation of the water pollution control plant or regional wastewater facility, sorry, getting that out-of-date terminology, where the recommendation relates to pledging of the wastewater collection system. And since that's a crossover item between the facility, the treatment facility, and the collection system, we're bringing that forward for your discussion and understanding of the financial implications of that. The updated 10-year gas and electric efficiency goals will be, I think, a good discussion for the commission to engage in. We've got,
Gas, so gas is going to be.
that's right. Thank you. Could you note
Will
that?
be, so the, we've had some late changes with how we're approaching our electric efficiency goals, and we'll talk to you a little more about that at the next Utilities Advisory Commission, but to be able to complete those and still achieve our CEC mandated deadlines, we're pushing the gas efficiency goals out to March.
So Commissioner Ballantyne and I are working on a commissioner's memo that deals with the whole idea of electrification in the context of whether fuel switching in that context, not for, we'll talk about transportation, but also the other issues that we've discussed as a group. What would be the right month then for us to have that ready?
I'd actually
So,
suggest
and what would be the
March
timing?
might be
Okay.
the good time frame. In fact, an item that didn't make it onto our list, but staff is discussing for March, would be on the topic of electrification. There's been an evaluation that utilities, along with development services, has been working on, and we think that will be ready to come forward for a discussion in March.
Okay, and so when do we need to have a draft to staff for you to take a look before it, so I have the deadline in my head?
Yes, let's see. Well, I think depending on how it factors into what staff will be bringing forward, to a certain extent, as long as we have sufficient time to both
I just-
understand
yeah.
how it's being presented, as well as incorporate it into the packet for Brown Act purposes, I think we'll be fine if we can get that done within a couple of weeks at most in advance of the March meeting.
Okay,
If we receive that. Mid-February, yes.
okay.
And then going back to February, we've got a preliminary financial forecast of all funds. So this would be in preparation for the upcoming fiscal year budget process. Then I would like to note the following item, which is the Property Assessed Clean Energy, or PACE, program. We've, perhaps you have as well, been contacted by at least one or two PACE providers. Be curious if, okay, very good. The commissioners have also been contacted, as staff has. Staff has been doing some evaluative work on the prospect of PACE program here in Palo Alto, and so we have a presentation that staff would like to make to the commission. There had been some discussion among chair and vice chair that we'll be bringing forward items for discussion that have not been perhaps as fully baked as the water integrated resource plan. So in this case, this would be a little more of a staff level, here's some analysis we've done, and would like to get some feedback. So it won't be quite the research project level of analysis and evaluation, but I think good food for discussion. And we would expect, well, maybe 80 or 75% in this case. Yes. So we'll be bringing that forward also for your meeting next month. We would expect, and by putting it on our agenda, we'll draw some interaction and perhaps some input from the industry as well. And finally, listed here, the utility strategic plan, which listed here as update, but perhaps to Commissioner Danaher's Vice Chair Danaher's point, it's really an overview or an introductory discussion to give you a sense of the way staff is looking at the effort to undertake an update to our strategic plan. One of the items perhaps we'll discuss next week or next month is how the commission would like to engage on that. It could range from what I understand last cycle was an ad hoc committee that met separately, or if it be the commission's pleasure, we could do it as a monthly standing item that would be discussed perhaps in addition to an ad hoc committee, which would allow you all to engage while at the same time certainly not limit the amount of time that would be provided. We do anticipate this to be a very extensive effort, both for engagement of staff as well as our community stakeholders, customers overall.
Yeah, I'm glad that we're going to bring it then half-baked, and I think we would probably set up a committee.
Good, good. And let's see, also note that in February we'll have the Rule 27 item coming back that was deferred off of today's agenda.
And just to note, that's already been approved by the council, but it's an operational item that we'd like to discuss in the commission.
Yes, thank you. And let's see, other items here are pretty well identified in terms of further out. I would just reiterate, as was noted, that in March, we would expect to be able to come back with an electrification analysis, specifically both related to heat pump water heaters as well as more broadly building requirements. Did we miss something?
I don't think so.
No, okay, this was in the packet.
Yeah, the quarterly update.
So is that not something we're
It's not a
discussing?
discussion, no, it's just a.
Right, we just
Oh,
provide it
questions.
periodically.
Okay.
So do any commissioners have any additional topics they'd like to discuss at future meetings?
I don't know if this is going to be part of the strategic plan, but I really would like to talk about what our sort of strategy is or approach to looking at advanced metering and other kinds of sort of what grid modernization efforts we're entertaining as an organization.
Definitely. Definitely both part of the strategic plan as well as ongoing work effort.
And do we revisit again the fiber issue anytime during the year?
See, we don't have anything scheduled, obviously, and at the same time, this is definitely an issue of ongoing interest, certainly from the City Council's perspective as well as staff. Let me discuss that with our IT staff, who's primarily leading our ongoing discussions there, and we'll try and set a time frame for it.
Yeah, when I look at you, I see Jeff right behind you, so I have to ask that.
Thank you.
Yeah, we definitely need to be doing our duty there. So make sure we get that.
Will do.
Also, I'd just point out that the rolling calendar is half empty, so.
We haven't
I wanna make a
quite
point of
filled
that.
out our perspective on the items that will be coming to the second half of the calendar year.
Some of it come from when we had kind of the guidelines of what the priorities were from the city council, and so that ended up being a lot of it. And so, since we haven't yet had the meeting with the new city council and the new mayor, it seems like we need to have that conversation before we can really set out what we really want to focus on for the year. I mean, so, and when does that happen?
Yes, there is a bit of a sequence, I think, that is still taking shape. The council is currently scheduled to have its first retreat on January 28th, actually. So just a couple of weeks out on a Saturday will be the first opportunity for the council to discuss its priorities. And part of that discussion we expect will be how the commission joint sessions will be structured.
Great. Any other items? So I'll note that our next scheduled meeting is February 1st. It's a Wednesday. We'll be meeting starting at 7 p.m. And our meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Next meeting's gonna have a lot of. Yes, we do.
bother me that we don't want it.
We'll fill it up.
We're done. It's not like the rest of my life, it's 12 months stuff. It's all me time, yeah.
Yeah, no, that was a mistake.
Oh, great.
So I think that this might be something.
Should have done that on the record, but, since it wasn't part of the...
And I have.